In this unit, we're talking about race, class, and gender. These are like the big three variables that all sociologists study, and they are particularly salient in education. Let's talk about gender first. When you read Chapter 4, it's important to remember that while, yes, we have seen some change in terms of opportunities for women in education, we still have a long way to go. That is, you can probably point to several success stories that make it seem like we've broken the glass ceiling, but that doesn't mean that we've achieved equality. It's more that we're making progress, but there's a lot left to do. Now, let's define the glass ceiling for a minute. The idea of a glass ceiling is simply that as women try to reach higher and higher levels of attainment and status, they can see what is possible. But there are still barriers that keep all women from reaching their goals, from reaching the top. That's why it's a glass ceiling. You can see the top, you just can't always reach it. There's one more point I want to talk about by way of an introduction, and that is the difference between sex and gender. In general, when we talk about sex, we're talking about biology, male and female. When we talk about gender, we're talking about learned behaviors of being masculine and feminine. Obviously, these are intertwined concepts because of the male sex, meaning boys and men, are mostly taught masculine behaviors, and the female sex, girls and women, are mostly taught feminine behaviors. There can be some overlap in what kinds of behaviors are taught to whom, of course, but I just want to give you that distinction so that you'll be aware of it as you read through this chapter. Okay, but back to Chapter 4. This chapter is going to talk a lot about sex role socialization, that children are socialized into roles that are thought of as male and female from the day we're born until the day we die. In fact, if you give it some thought, you can probably think of a number of examples of how girls and boys take on their different roles from very early ages. And children learn to perpetuate these differences from about the age of 3.5 or so, when they start to learn how to influence their peers, other boys and girls. This chapter also talks about differential treatment of boys and girls in school. This doesn't mean that boys are treated better than girls in school. It simply means that boys receive more of the attention, especially in elementary school, than girls, even if it's not always good attention. Studies show that boys are disciplined more than girls in school, and even that serves to reinforce these sex role boundaries. Make sure you take a look at Table 4.2, the percentage of bachelor's degrees earned by women and men by field, as it compares over about a 15-year period. Interesting stuff there. Lastly, on this topic, there's a lot of debate still on single-sex schools, particularly colleges, and whether they provide the supportive background that women need to succeed, or whether they merely reinforce gender stereotypes, that women need to be treated specially from men in order to succeed. Now that's a good segue into the discussion on race and ethnicity, because there's a similar debate on schools being established specifically for children or college-age students that are separated on the basis of race, particularly schools for African American children and young adults that provide them the support they need to overcome some of the race-based discrimination that they have likely experienced from an early age. Again, two sides to this issue. Is it supportive, or does it serve merely to continue to separate African American students from other ethnicities and reinforce that they need to be treated specially? Think about it. Another thing to note as you read through the second half of Chapter 4 is that race and social class are inextricably linked to each other. That is to say, there is a disproportionate amount of minority students who are also raised in low-income families. And so some of the discrimination we see of African American or Hispanic students, let's say, may be more about class discrimination than about race discrimination. That's certainly not always the case, because there is still a significant amount of racial discrimination and bigotry out there. But just be aware of how social class of rich versus poor plays into those experiences. You're going to have to read about the concept of white flight in this chapter, of how whites have, over the last 4 decades or so, moved to the suburbs, and in essence, segregation has remained in schools simply because neighborhoods are segregated. There's a big table, Table 4.5, that shows the percent of minority enrollments in schools in the top 25 largest school systems and take a look at those percentages. Look at how they've changed over time as an indicator of this concept of white flight. Last thing, you're going to read about the experiences in education of select minority groups, including one that is largely overlooked in many studies, Native Americans. Most studies of race or ethnicity in American schools focus on the experiences of African Americans, Hispanics, or Asian students. But there is a lot to be learned from the experiences also of immigrant students and from Native Americans. Be sure to read Box 4.2, An Indian Father's Plea by Robert Lake, aka Medicine Grizzly Bear. It's fascinating, and it's a bit sad to try to understand what this father's son is going through in a more traditional school system. So that's it for this week. Be sure to take the quiz and head on over to the discussion forums for some more stimulating discussion.